Imagine standing on the surface of another planet. The air is thin, the sky is a different color, and the ground beneath your feet is not Earth. This is no longer a dream, this is the future of humanity. It's the year 2100, and we're no longer confined to Earth. Humans have traveled across the stars, colonized new worlds, and encountered the unknown. But here's the real question: what happens to us when we leave our home planet behind? When we venture into space, how does our body, and more importantly, our DNA, adapt to the extremes of space? The truth is, we're entering an entirely new phase of human evolution, one where our genetic code will be tested like never before. We've always known that space is a hostile environment: radiation, zero gravity, isolation. But now, with space stations orbiting distant moons, colonies on Mars, and deep space expeditions, we're starting to learn what it takes to survive and thrive beyond Earth. But here's the catch: it's not just about technology. It's about how we change, how we genetically adapt to these extreme environments. Because, to put it bluntly, our DNA wasn't built for life outside Earth. And that's where science comes in. So, let's take a journey into the future, to the year 2100, where humans aren't just surviving in space, they're evolving to live in it. We'll explore the science, the technology, and the ethical dilemmas that come with the most groundbreaking experiment humanity has ever undertaken: modifying our very genetic code to meet the challenges of the cosmos. The human genome in space is not science fiction anymore, it's our reality. And in the next 2 hours, we'll dive deep into how humanity's genetic blueprint is being rewritten to take us further than we've ever dreamed. Ready? Let's get started. Before we could think about adapting the human body to space, scientists first had to understand what space does to the human body. When astronauts first started heading into space back in the 20th century, no one really knew what would happen to them up there. Sure, we understood the basics of how weightlessness and radiation might affect the body, but the deeper molecular changes, that was a whole other story. The first real clue came from the effects of microgravity on astronauts. In the early days, researchers started noticing muscle atrophy, bone density loss, and cardiovascular issues. But as the missions became longer, especially with the International Space Station, scientists began to realize the challenges didn't stop there. It wasn't just about losing muscle mass, it was about the changes happening deep inside the body, at the cellular and genetic level. In 2001, NASA's twin study, which compared the health of identical twins, one who spent a year in space and one who stayed on Earth, marked a turning point. The results were mind-blowing. The astronaut in space, Scott Kelly, showed significant changes in his genetic expression. His telomeres, those protective caps at the end of chromosomes, actually grew longer in space. But after he returned to Earth, they shrank back to normal. It was a clear sign that space was somehow interacting with his genetic code. The question was, how? At the same time, back on Earth, breakthroughs in genetic research were exploding. CRISPR technology, a powerful tool for editing genes, was just starting to gain traction. Scientists realized that they could potentially use this technology not just to study DNA, but to modify it, editing out the flaws that space might exacerbate or enhancing traits that could make humans better suited for space travel. This was the beginning of what some might call space genetics. The idea that we could alter human DNA to make it more resilient to the harsh realities of space, radiation, microgravity, isolation, and so on, started to become a tangible possibility. The focus shifted from just adapting to surviving in space to evolving to thrive in it. But before any of this could happen, researchers needed to gather data, and they needed to understand how space affected human genes on a deep, molecular level. The early years of space genetics were a bit like exploring uncharted territory. They started sending more organisms into space, animals, plants, and eventually human cells, to see how they reacted to the space environment. And while the results were fascinating, they were also puzzling. For example, certain plants were found to grow better in space while others struggled. Some animal species were able to adapt better to the zero-gravity conditions, while others experienced rapid deterioration. It was clear that living in space wasn't just about being tough or smart, it was about biology. and it was up to scientists to figure out how to tweak that biology to make it work in space. With each experiment, they learned more about the effects of space on life, and more importantly, what could be done to overcome the challenges. The question was no longer whether humans could survive space, it was about how we could optimize our biology to live there. And that's when the conversation shifted to genetic modification. Could we use the tools at our disposal to enhance our resilience, to build a human genome that could not just survive but actually thrive in space? That's where things started to get really interesting. As humanity began to send longer missions into space, the true extent of how space affects our biology became impossible to ignore. In the early days, it was just about surviving. But as the years went on, astronauts spent months, sometimes even years, on the International Space Station, and it became clear that survival wasn't the only issue. It was about maintaining the body's health in an environment so radically different from Earth. And that's where the problems began. Space isn't kind to the human body. The lack of gravity causes muscles to atrophy. Bones lose density. The cardiovascular system doesn't work the same way, and even your immune system takes a hit. In microgravity, everything is different. You might think weightlessness sounds cool, but the reality is it messes with everything inside you. Without gravity pulling fluids down, for instance, your body has to adapt, and that's when astronauts start facing issues with fluid distribution. The heart starts working differently, even causing changes to blood pressure and circulation, but these were just the physical symptoms. What scientists were really concerned about were the cellular and genetic changes happening behind the scenes. It became evident that the human genome itself was being affected by space. One of the most significant discoveries came from studying how the DNA in human cells responds to radiation. You see, Earth's atmosphere and magnetic field shield us from most of the radiation in space. But once you leave our planet's protective bubble, that radiation bombards your cells constantly. In fact, it's about 10 times more intense in deep space than it is on Earth. Now, radiation is a tricky thing. It can damage our DNA directly, causing mutations that may not show up immediately, but could lead to long-term health problems. In space, where the exposure is constant, the risk increases dramatically, and this wasn't just an issue for astronauts on long-duration missions. Even short-term trips, like those to the moon, could have an impact on the body's genetic makeup. This is where the real struggle began. The science community started asking tough questions. Could our DNA repair itself in space? Was our body even equipped to deal with this level of radiation? Could we genetically adapt to survive in the vacuum of space? At first, the answers weren't easy to find. The early tests on spacebound animals like mice monkeys and fruit flies weren't reassuring. Their genes were showing signs of damage after even short periods in space. But even in the face of these challenges, scientists refused to back down. In fact, these early struggles were the catalyst for a new kind of research, genetic research that was aimed at figuring out exactly how to tweak the human genome to protect it from the dangers of space. And that's when things started to get interesting. Scientists began to focus not just on the effects of space on human cells, but on how to counteract those effects. Could we make our DNA stronger, more resistant to radiation, and better able to handle the stress of space travel? Could we use tools like CRISPR to fix genetic vulnerabilities and enhance the body's natural defenses? The early struggles weren't just about surviving space, they were about finding the tools to change the game entirely. The goal wasn't to just manage space travel, but to make it possible for humans to truly adapt, to evolve in a way that allowed us to thrive in environments we'd never dreamed of before. This was the moment when space genetics moved from theory to action. Scientists began to design experiments not just to study the effects of space, but to find the solution, genetically modifying human cells to help us face the challenges ahead. The real question now wasn't whether we could survive in space, but whether we could evolve fast enough to live there for good. As the challenges of space became more apparent, scientists realized they weren't just dealing with a temporary setback. They were facing a long-term problem. Humans, as we are right now, aren't built for the extremes of space. Our bones aren't strong enough to handle extended periods of microgravity. Our immune system isn't prepared for the constant bombardment of cosmic radiation. And as we saw with the twin study, our genetic material itself isn't exactly designed for life beyond Earth. So what if the answer wasn't just surviving space, but changing ourselves to fit the environment? This is where genetic engineering really comes into play. Up until now, humans have adapted to the environment around us. Think about how we've evolved over millennia to deal with everything from extreme cold to high altitudes. But space? That's a whole new ballgame. The genetic modifications we'd need to survive there were unlike anything we've ever considered before. We were talking about altering our very DNA to survive in places where we're completely out of our element. It's around this time that technologies like CRISPR began to catch the eye of space agencies. Scientists realized that CRISPR and gene editing tools weren't just revolutionary for treating diseases or enhancing crops, they could be the key to helping humanity adapt to the challenges of space. The idea wasn't just to survive, it was to thrive. To design a human genome that could handle the physical demands of long-term space travel and even life on other planets. In practice, this meant making some significant changes. First off, radiation became a huge focus. In space, we're exposed to much higher levels of radiation than we are on Earth. For most of us, this would be a deal breaker. But scientists started looking at ways to make our cells more resistant to radiation damage. The goal was to make our DNA more resilient to the effects of cosmic rays and solar radiation. Think of it like giving our cells a protective shield. One approach involved enhancing the DNA repair mechanisms within our cells, so if radiation did cause damage, the body could fix it more. Then there's the issue of muscle and bone loss. In microgravity, we don't use our muscles in the same way we do on Earth, which leads to muscle atrophy and bone density loss. Over time, astronauts can lose as much as 1 to 2% of their bone mass per month. But what if we could engineer humans with stronger bones and muscles that could handle the stresses of low gravity? It sounds like something out of a sci-fi movie, but research in genetic modification was already moving toward that goal. One idea was to enhance the production of proteins that could stimulate bone growth or muscle repair, ensuring that astronauts didn't lose crucial tissue during long space missions. But this kind of genetic intervention wasn't just about fighting the negative effects of space. It was also about optimizing the human body to make space travel easier. For example, scientists were experimenting with modifying the human circulatory system to handle the pressures of low gravity. Blood circulation in space is tricky. Without gravity to help pull blood downward, fluids tend to shift toward the upper body. Over time, this can cause problems like facial puffiness and pressure on the eyes. But by tweaking the genes responsible for blood vessel function, researchers hoped they could develop a system that would keep fluids in balance, even in zero gravity. These modifications weren't just hypothetical, they were happening in real time. Geneticists and biotechnologists were already testing these ideas in laboratories, modifying animal DNA to make them more resilient to space. Mice, for example, were genetically altered to have enhanced bone density and muscle mass, and then sent to space to see how they would cope. The results were promising, showing that genetic modifications could indeed help organisms adapt to the harsh conditions of space. If these changes could work on animals, the next logical step was applying them to humans. But the challenges weren't just biological. There were and still are deep ethical questions about modifying the human genome. Who gets to decide which traits are enhanced? What happens if we start creating humans with traits that are no longer considered natural? These were all questions that would need to be answered as humanity began to experiment with genetically altered astronauts and spaceborne humans. Still, despite the uncertainties, the push to genetically adapt humans for space was gaining momentum. The hope wasn't just to send people into space, it was to make them capable of thriving there, adapting in ways that would allow us to live on other planets, build colonies, and truly become a multi-planet species. This was no longer just about being brave enough to travel to the stars, it was about making sure that when we got there, we were ready to stay. As humanity began to establish more permanent colonies on Mars and the Moon, The next logical step wasn't just about sending astronauts to space, it was about creating a new generation that would be born there. Spaceborne humans, living and growing in environments so far removed from Earth, were about to become a reality. But here's the big question: how do you raise a human being in space? We've already discussed how the human genome isn't quite cut out for life in space. From bone loss to radiation exposure, the challenges are real, and living on a new planet, whether it's Mars, the Moon, or beyond, brings even more complications. The question shifted from can we survive, to how do we make sure the next generation thrives? Scientists and bioengineers began working on something truly groundbreaking: genetically modified humans. The goal was to ensure that children born in space would be genetically adapted to the harsh conditions they'd face: lower gravity, different radiation levels, and artificial environments. If humans were to live on Mars for generations, the human body would need to evolve in ways we hadn't considered before. And genetic engineering was the key. Now, when we talk about spaceborne humans, we're not just talking about astronauts who've been genetically enhanced to survive space. We're talking about a new kind of human being, a human whose genetics have been altered from birth to be optimized for life in space. These spaceborne humans might have enhanced bones that are more resistant to the weakening effects of low gravity. They could have modified circulatory systems that can deal with the challenges of fluid shifts in a microgravity environment. Their immune systems might be tweaked to better handle the unique pathogens they could encounter in space, as well as the limited medical resources available in space colonies. But it wasn't just about survival. The idea was to create people who could truly thrive in the long term. Imagine humans born on Mars, their bodies designed to handle the thin atmosphere and lower gravity. Maybe they're taller, with larger lung capacities to cope with the thin air. Their muscles and bones could be more efficient at working in reduced gravity, helping them to move around and carry out tasks that would be difficult for someone used to Earth's gravity. These modifications weren't just theoretical. The first experiments in genetically altering embryos for space travel were already underway. Scientists began with animal models, mice, monkeys, and other species, to see how their genes could be adjusted for the space environment. Some changes were focused on enhancing physical traits like bone density or muscle mass, while others worked on genetic alterations that could improve the body's ability to repair itself after radiation exposure. But the real challenge was how to make these genetic changes stable over generations. After all, it wasn't just about adapting to space for a few years, it was about ensuring that future generations of spaceborne humans could live, reproduce, and thrive in an environment their Earth ancestors never had to deal with. This brought us to the idea of gene drives, a way to make sure these genetic modifications could be passed down to future generations. Gene drives are a controversial tool that can ensure specific traits are inherited, making them essential in creating a population that is genetically adapted to life in space. By introducing gene drives into the gene pool, we could ensure that humans born in space would carry the necessary adaptations without losing them over generations. It wasn't just about biological changes, though. These spaceborne humans were living in completely artificial environments. A colony on Mars, for instance, would be sealed off from the outside environment, with a controlled atmosphere and artificial gravity to mimic conditions found on Earth. Life in these environments would present challenges that were far beyond just genetics. Spaceborne humans would have to learn how to live within these artificial ecosystems, work with robotics, and rely on technology to survive. But they'd also be learning how to adapt socially and psychologically to a life without the familiar comforts of Earth. And as these spaceborne populations grew, a new question arose: would they be considered fully human? Sure, they'd share the same basic genetic structure, but their bodies would be fundamentally different from those of people born on Earth. How would this affect their identity? Would there be a divide between Earth-born humans and spaceborne humans, leading to cultural or even political divides? The rise of spaceborne humans also sparked debates about the ethics of genetic modifications. Who gets to decide which traits are enhanced? Is it ethical to create humans with traits that would never have been possible on Earth? As humanity took these first steps into space colonization, it became clear that the future of our species wasn't just about exploring new worlds, it was about becoming something new ourselves. and that meant redefining what it meant to be human in the first place. In the quest for survival, humans had not only conquered space, they were in many ways becoming the architects of their own evolution. As humanity pushes the boundaries of space exploration, we're not just facing scientific challenges, we're grappling with some of the most profound ethical questions in history. The idea of altering the human genome to adapt to space raises serious concerns. Who decides what changes are made to our genes? What happens when we start playing with the very blueprint of life itself? One of the first questions to emerge in this new era of space genetics was, who owns the rights to our genes? We're talking about fundamental changes to the DNA that make us who we are. Should individuals be able to consent to having their genes modified, or does the responsibility lie with governments and corporations leading the charge into space? And what happens when those genetic modifications are passed down to future generations, people who didn't have a say in the changes made to their genetic code? At the heart of these questions lies an ethical dilemma that has existed for decades. Where do we draw the line between what's natural and what's artificial? Throughout history, humanity has strived to improve itself, whether through medical advancements, technologies, or even social systems. But genetic modifications go to a much deeper level. Altering our genes isn't just about making us healthier or enhancing physical traits, it's about fundamentally changing what it means to be human. Take for instance the idea of modifying embryos for space. If we start designing babies with certain genetic advantages like increased resistance to radiation or stronger bones for surviving in low gravity, how far do we go? What if these modifications are intended not just for survival, but to give individuals an advantage in space, making them more adaptable, more resilient, or even more intelligent? Who decides what traits are desirable, and what does that mean for the diversity of the human race? Would we risk losing the richness of human genetic variation in pursuit of an idealized space human? This is where the conversation gets complicated. In space, where the environments are so radically different from Earth, genetic modifications might be necessary for survival. But the ethical concerns become even more pressing when we think about the long-term consequences. Space colonists born on Mars or another planet might have altered immune systems, better tolerance to radiation or other physical changes that make them better suited to their new home. But those genetic changes could come with unforeseen risks, perhaps creating new vulnerabilities or health issues that we don't fully understand yet. And then there's the question of consent. When we genetically modify humans, are we imposing these changes on future generations without their knowledge or consent? If someone is born in a space colony, will they feel like they belong to Earth anymore? Will they view themselves as Earth-born humans or something entirely new? And if they're born with genetic traits that were designed by humans on Earth, will they ever truly feel like they have control over their own destiny? This brings us to the issue of genetic inequality. What happens if genetic modifications for space colonization are only available to certain groups of people, perhaps the wealthy or those with specific skills deemed essential for life on Mars or the Moon? What kind of social divides could this create? Imagine a future where the genetic modifications needed to survive in space are available to only a small percentage of the population. Would it create a new form of inequality, where the genetically enhanced are seen as a privileged class, and those left behind on Earth face increasingly difficult conditions? In fact, some experts warn that we might be opening the door to a kind of genetic elitism. If only certain individuals or groups can afford to undergo genetic modifications for space, we could end up with a two-tier society, those who are genetically modified for space and those who are not. This could lead to a whole host of social and political issues as we confront questions about fairness, access, and human rights. Then there's the issue of unintended consequences. Every genetic modification carries risks. What happens if a change meant to help someone survive radiation exposure actually triggers a genetic disorder? Or what if a modification that makes bones stronger in low gravity causes unforeseen problems on Earth, or in environments with different gravity levels? These are risks that scientists can't predict with certainty, especially when the changes are as fundamental as altering the human genome. Another pressing concern is the idea of designer babies. Genetic editing, if not regulated carefully, could open up the possibility of choosing traits beyond just survival benefits. What if, down the line, parents start using genetic editing to choose the traits of their children? Height, intelligence, physical appearance, or even personality traits? The temptation to create a perfect human being could be too strong for some, but it raises deep ethical questions. Is it right to manipulate life to fit a particular vision of what's ideal, or should we leave the randomness and beauty of natural genetics intact? These ethical questions don't have easy answers, and as space colonization becomes a reality, the stakes will only get higher. The line between survival and genetic manipulation becomes blurrier, and the world will need to find ways to navigate these ethical waters. Who gets to decide what's best for the human race in space? And as we venture further into the cosmos, how will we reconcile our technological advancements with the very nature of what it means to be human? These questions will shape the future of humanity, not just on Earth, but on whatever planets we might call home. As humanity ventures deeper into space and begins to modify the human genome to adapt to alien worlds, we're also seeing a revolution in another field that's changing the game: artificial intelligence. AI isn't just the future of space exploration, it's the future of space genetics too. And when you combine the power of AI with genetic engineering, you get something truly transformative. One of the major hurdles of space genetics is the vast amount of data that scientists need to process. Human DNA, as complex as it is, becomes even more challenging to modify when you're dealing with the unknowns of space environments. How does a gene function in microgravity? How does radiation affect the repair mechanisms of DNA? How do these genetic changes affect the long-term health of a person? The sheer volume of questions can be overwhelming for human researchers alone. That's where AI steps in. AI algorithms, with their ability to analyze and interpret huge amounts of data, are making it possible for scientists to understand and predict genetic changes in ways that were once unimaginable. In the past, editing genes was a slow and tedious process, but AI has sped up the entire procedure. Machine learning models are now able to predict the outcomes of genetic modifications with a level of precision that allows scientists to take far fewer risks when designing these changes. But the relationship between AI and space genetics goes even deeper. AI can help design the very tools we use to edit genes. For example, AI-powered systems can create crisper gene editing sequences that are more precise and efficient than ever before. These algorithms analyze the genome of organisms, identifying which areas are most vulnerable to space-related stressors like radiation or microgravity, and suggesting modifications that would help those organisms adapt. What once took years of research and trial and error can now be done in a matter of months or even weeks. Moreover, AI can help optimize the genetic editing process itself. By simulating the effects of genetic changes on a molecular level, AI allows scientists to experiment in a virtual environment before actually making any physical changes to DNA. This in silico testing is revolutionizing the way genetic research is done. It allows researchers to run simulations on how specific genetic modifications might work in space, whether it's a tweak to enhance radiation resistance or to strengthen bone density in low gravity, before any real-world experiments are even conducted. In the context of space travel, where missions can last years, this becomes invaluable. Imagine astronauts on a multi-year journey to Mars. They won't have the luxury of frequent communication with Earth, and medical interventions will be limited. AI could help them monitor their health and make real-time decisions about their genetic modifications. Through advanced algorithms, space AI could continuously analyze astronauts' DNA to identify signs of stress or damage caused by space radiation, and then suggest ways to modify their genetic code in response. And it's not just on a mission, it's in the design of the very habitats where we'll live in space. Space colonies on Mars or the Moon, for example, will rely heavily on AI to create sustainable living environments. AI will monitor everything from atmospheric conditions to crop growth, ensuring that the artificial ecosystems are functioning properly. But it's also playing a critical role in understanding how humans will adapt to those environments on a genetic level. Could AI help design humans who are not just able to survive but who are perfectly suited for life in these off-world colonies? AI's role doesn't stop at gene editing. In the long term, as humans evolve in space, AI might be essential in ensuring that we don't lose touch with our genetic diversity. As we become more genetically modified, we might run the risk of narrowing our gene pool, making future generations susceptible to unforeseen diseases or environmental changes. AI could help monitor genetic diversity in space populations, suggesting new genetic strategies to maintain a healthy, adaptable human species, even in isolated and confined off-world colonies. Now let's talk about AI's involvement in one of the most fascinating aspects of space genetics: the creation of synthetic life forms. As we push the boundaries of space exploration, the idea of creating entirely new artificial life forms, ones that are specifically designed for space, has gained traction. These life forms might be engineered to thrive in environments that are inhospitable to humans, or perhaps even serve as bioengineered companions for astronauts. AI would play a huge role in designing these organisms, ensuring they're genetically capable of surviving in extreme conditions. But AI doesn't just help create life, it can also assist in preserving it. As we venture further into space, we'll need ways to preserve human and animal genetic material, as well as the genetic diversity of the ecosystems we bring with us. AI could be responsible for managing genetic databases, ensuring that the genetic resources of life on Earth are safeguarded, and even allowing us to store the blueprint of life, to be used in future generations or on other planets. Of course, this level of technological integration raises its own set of challenges. While AI is powerful, it's also deeply complex. What happens if the algorithms get it wrong? What if an AI-powered genetic modification ends up having unintended consequences, like creating a new disease or weakening the human body in ways we hadn't predicted? Who's responsible if AI makes a mistake that alters the future of humanity? These are questions we'll need to confront as we move forward, and they raise the stakes even higher in the field of space genetics. Nevertheless, the role of AI in space genetics is undeniable. As we look to colonize other planets and adapt our biology for life beyond Earth, AI will be our guide. It's a partnership that could ultimately change not just how we live in space, but how we define what it means to be human in the first place. The future of human evolution is being written with the help of AI, and as we head into the stars, this partnership will be one of the most powerful tools at our disposal. Looking ahead, it's clear that the future of humanity lies beyond the Earth. Whether it's Mars, the Moon, or even the moons of Jupiter, the idea of a multi-planetary civilization is becoming increasingly possible. But for humanity to truly thrive in space, we must do more than just survive, we must evolve. And that evolution will be powered in large part by genetics. The genetic adaptations needed for life on distant worlds will take decades, if not centuries, to unfold. But it's not just about adjusting to the physical conditions of space, it's about evolving socially, culturally, and psychologically as well. Space is a harsh and unforgiving place, and it will force us to rethink everything we know about being human. Imagine a world where humans are born in space, genetically modified to survive in low gravity, to resist radiation, and to thrive in environments we can't even fully comprehend right now. These spaceborne humans, shaped by the very conditions they were designed for, could evolve into something that looks and perhaps even thinks different from us. This might sound like science fiction, but the groundwork is already being laid. As we begin to see permanent colonies on Mars, the Moon, and beyond, we'll also see a shift in how we define ourselves as a species. Earth will no longer be the center of humanity's identity. The line between Earthborn and spaceborne humans will become more pronounced, and questions of cultural identity will arise. Will those born on Mars feel more connected to Earth, Or will they develop their own unique identity with their own customs, language, and ways of thinking? In this future, the human race will be split not just by geography, but by biology. As genetic modifications become more common, we may see humans who are better adapted to extreme environments. Perhaps some with enhanced cognitive abilities, others with physical traits that help them survive on distant planets. These differences could create new social dynamics, new conflicts, and perhaps even new forms of inequality. Will there be a divide between genetically enhanced individuals and those who have not undergone genetic modifications? Will these divisions be based on geography, Earthborn versus spaceborn? Or will the space colonists themselves create new categories based on the specific environments they've adapted to? And what about the ethical concerns that arise from this genetic revolution? As we venture into space, we'll have to confront questions that are bigger than survival. We'll have to answer, what does it mean to be human? Is it defined by where we are born, by the genetic code we carry, or by the choices we make? If we become more than human, will we still be human? And if we begin to alter our own biology, what responsibility do we have to the future of our species? These questions will only grow more urgent as space colonization becomes a reality. We'll need to consider the rights of genetically modified humans. Will spaceborn humans have the same rights as Earthborn humans? How do we ensure that these genetic modifications don't lead to exploitation, discrimination, or a new form of social Darwinism? As we move forward, we'll have to ensure that technology is used for the benefit of all, and not just a privileged few. But beyond the challenges, there is hope. The possibilities of space genetics could lead to a new era of human evolution, one where humanity is no longer confined to Earth's boundaries. We might become a truly multiplanetary species with the ability to thrive in environments we've never thought possible. The diseases and conditions that plague us on Earth might be left behind, as we adapt to new environments and create new ways of life. Diseases that once wiped out entire populations could be eradicated through genetic modifications, allowing us to build healthier, stronger communities on distant worlds. Imagine a future where humanity no longer fights over resources, where space colonies work together to create a sustainable existence. Genetic modifications could lead to humans who are better equipped to work with the technologies and ecosystems of space, reducing the strain on our resources and allowing for more sustainable growth. In this future, space could become a new frontier for peace and cooperation, a place where human ingenuity and adaptability take center stage. At the same time, though, we must be cautious. We can't allow ourselves to become blinded by the promise of technological progress. As we journey into space, we'll need to stay grounded in our ethics, our humanity, and our shared responsibility to one another. Space, genetics, and artificial intelligence are all converging to create a future unlike anything we've ever known. And while that future may be filled with uncertainty, it also offers unimaginable possibilities. As we embark on this journey, we'll need to ask ourselves, how do we evolve not just biologically but ethically and socially? But as we reach for them, we'll have to remember that the future of humanity depends not just on where we go, but on who we become along the way.